Alright, as promised, video 3 in the protein series, let's talk a little bit about the lingo of proteins and how it can be discussed in the literature and by the different species and how their research councils look at defining protein and protein quality in the various animals. So this section in this video is going to be a bunch of definitions, and we're going to be explaining what a lot of these terms mean, because that's the essence to understanding proteins when we start getting into evaluating research in animal nutrition. The first definition is, what is true protein? And a true protein is only protein composed of amino acids. And so in contrast, we have non-protein nitrogen, which is the second definition. And those are compounds that contain nitrogen and can be converted to protein by microbes, but they are not protein in nature. And that should be pure protein, not sure protein. I just saw that typo. And so when we contrast the two, together they make up what we call crude protein. But true protein is the one that has only amino acids and is, like we talked about, the structure and all of that. That's a true protein. Then we have non-protein nitrogen, and those are things like urea, biuret, that are high nitrogen, but not protein in nature. And so when we measure protein in a lab, a lot of the times, many of you that were in 4-H and FFA, you had feed tags on your animal show feeds, and it said crude protein, minimum or maximum. And that can sometimes equal total protein, but generally it's the true protein plus the non-protein nitrogen. It depends on what species you're dealing with. And it is calculated. In the lab, we actually measure the percent nitrogen and use a standard conversion factor of 6.25 to estimate the amount of crude protein. So if you had something that was 1% nitrogen, you'd multiply it times 6.25, and then you would have 6.25% protein. So if you had 2%, it'd be like 13, 14%, etc. And so that's kind of the beginnings of understanding that there is what we call protein in the form of amino acids only, and then we also have the non-protein nitrogen. That is loose nitrogen in the system. It could be nitrates, nitrites, ammonia, other things that will make up that nitrogen compound. That becomes especially important in ruminant nutrition because we can feed non-protein nitrogen to our ruminants and the microbes will help us out. Another term that you'll sometimes see as you're reading through particularly swine literature is digestible protein. And that's the amount or proportion of the crude protein in a diet. Say if a feed's 18% crude protein, it's the proportion of that the animal actually is going to digest. And that's going to be what is the difference between the feed and the feces. And so it kind of starts to look at more what amino acids and what's truly getting into the animal system, as opposed to just the crude protein, here's what's in the feed. I kind of look at it like we did the energy flow chart, where we had gross energy is what's in the feed. That'd be the equivalent of our crude protein. But then we account for what's being lost by the animal, and now we're able to get to digestible protein and those types of things. And so it's all about shifting as a field. We are shifting away from crude protein and really starting to look at what's degradable, not degradable, specific amino acids, and other terminology that is really starting to be defined better and better as we begin to understand protein nutrition better. The species that have the most flexibility with protein is going to be the ruminants because of the microbial population that is pre-gastric. Protein quality, and this is something that we need to understand the difference of. Protein quality is not the same for all animals. It's the amount or the ratio of the essential amino acids, those 10 amino acids we talked about 2 videos ago, that are going to meet an animal's specific need. It's way more than just crude protein. It's getting to the nitty-gritty of what they need. So, for example, let's take swine. And we are talking about protein quality in swine, what a growing pig, like say a nursery pig is, that's just been weaned, what they need for protein and that protein quality and that ratio of amino acids is very different than what a mature boar might need that is on a maintenance type diet. So this is going to be tailored to an animal specific need. And this is where we're heading with protein, is trying to match the amino acids to that animal specific production. We're even seeing this in the ruminants as we're starting to feed certain bypass or escape proteins that escape microbial fermentation and get into the small intestine of the dairy cow, so that we are meeting a specific protein quality standard for that cow's needs. We talked briefly about digestible protein, just to make sure we're clear. It is the difference between the amount eaten by the animal, and so how much protein did that sheep eat, and then how much protein came out in the feces, because nothing is 100% digested. And so that's what we're defining as digestible. Amino acid profile, and that's kind of getting into where we're defining protein quality a little bit more, but we're going to look at those amino acids and how do they match that animal's requirements. Now, there are some things that we have to be aware of, that even though an amino acid can be digested and absorbed into the bloodstream, it still may be bound to something that can't be used, and that's an availability issue. And so we need to understand not just the amino acid profile, but the availability of it to understand what's getting used by the animal. And any excess protein is going to be processed and excreted via the urine. Sometimes you'll see the biological value, which simply takes into account, it takes digestibility one other step. We're going to take that intake, and we're going to subtract what comes out in both the feces and the urine, and take that as a percentage of what was digested. And so it's just that biological value is accounting for both fecal and urinary losses as well. So really trying to get to what is at the tissue level. When we talk about ruminants, they generally discuss things as one of two fates. It's either going to be undegraded in the rumen or a bypass or escape protein, and that means the bugs don't use it. It's going to bypass, or not bypass the rumen, it has to go through the rumen, that's why we call it escape or undegraded. And so it's an undegraded protein that doesn't get used by the microbes, and it's going to pass to the omasum, the abomasum, and on to the small intestine. Now, on the flip side, the other option is that it could be degraded. So that's a dietary protein or non-protein nitrogen source in the rumen that is used by the microbes for their own growth, development, and that's going to contribute to what we call microbial cell protein down the road. So please remember that the undegraded, degraded definitions are only used in ruminants. Dairy cattle, beef cattle, starting to see it a little bit more in sheep nutrition, but mostly in the cattle species. They have different terms with like beef cattle versus dairy cattle, but you will see the term degraded and undegraded in both of those definitions. The other one that we see in ruminants is what we call metabolizable protein. And that is the amount of amino acids or protein that is getting to the small intestine of the cow, sheep, goat, giraffe, whatever. And so it is a combination of the bypass or escape protein, the undegraded protein, plus whatever is made by the microbial cells. And so we have two pools, and we're going to define that a little bit later when we get into digestion and absorption of proteins by the ruminant animal. All right, that gets us some basic terms that as we start talking about protein utilization, we need to have those terms in the back of our mind. When we talk about the general functions of proteins, and if you think about it, when we talk about the simple and the conjugated and the fibrous proteins, that is the structural unit of the animal body. It is the connective tissue, the skeletal muscle, the smooth muscle, the cardiac muscle. All of that is built out of protein structures. Additionally, proteins are essential to metabolism. How many times have we talked about enzymes in this class? Daily. Hormones, your immune system, especially with everything going on in society, making sure our immune system is healthy. Hereditary transmissions, DNA, RNA, protein-based. And finally, if needed, that carbon skeleton of the amino acid can be utilized as an energy source. That's going to wrap up this third video. We're going to move next into protein digestion and absorption.